I feel your pain. I lost half of my family so far.
I think every person in Israel, and I'm sure that on the Palestinian side, has someone that they have lost. So how do you even begin to coexist in that violent cycle?
Your story is quite unusual. Mm-hmm. Can you talk about what you remember?
Thank you to all three of you so much for being here. I was literally in the back watching the last 40 or 50 minutes, and I just found myself getting emotional all over again. This is such a powerful film, and I want to thank you guys so much for working on it. I'm sure it was a tireless effort, and I think it shows in the final product. So once again, congratulations, and thank you so much for being here and sharing it with us today. I want to start with maybe an easier question to transition into maybe some of the more complex questions. But Yehuda, how are you? How are you doing?
Fine. It's important to remember these events happened almost 2 years ago. So there's been some healing in the interim. And we're all moving along with our lives, moving ahead with our lives. LIAT in particular, that's her stated goal, and her kids are all duly occupied. Ofri is working on the kibbutz, Netta is studying chemistry at the Hebrew University, and Aya is still in the army in a special unit. And Chaya and myself, we're on Kibbutz Shamrat, living our lives.
Can you talk about the significance of being here in Philadelphia and getting to present the film here in your hometown?
I was born in Philadelphia. I'm a Philadelphia native, and it's always. I've always loved the city because many of the youngest memories I have as a child were made here, whether it's in the Franklin Institute or the Rodin Museum or the Philadelphia Art Museum, Finletter Elementary School. These are some of my earliest memories, and of course I cherish them. So it's a great pleasure to be back in Philadelphia.
Yoni, I know you spoke a little bit about it briefly in the beginning, but I wanted to give you one more chance if you wanted to speak at all about how you're feeling being here and getting to present the film here. This is the first audience in this state who have seen the film, and I think the response is palpable.
Yeah, I think like I said before, I think the most important thing about this film is the chance to see a family on stage and screen rather model and unpack some of the complexities that a lot of people have been dealing with, not just for the past 2 years, but long before that. And so I'm happy that we're getting a chance to have those conversations here and after the film.
Brandon, let's talk about the film. Let's just dive right in. Can you tell our audience a little bit about the impetus behind working on the film and some of the unexpected familial connection that inspired it?
Sure. Thank you all so much for being here, first of all. So I was at a wedding on October 7th. I was at a wedding in the mountains and had no cell service. And I came back later that day and my phone was, blowing up with the news of the attack. And then our family members texting me saying, LIAT and Aviv are missing. At that point, I don't think we officially knew they were kidnapped, but I reached out to Yehuda and Chaya, and I said, I love you guys. How can I help? What can Lance and I do? I work with my brother, Lance. He produces films. I direct films. We live in Washington, D.C. And a few days later, we were on the phone with them, and Yehuda shared with us that he was getting a lot of response from the U.S. government. Within a week or maybe a little bit more, they were on a phone call with President Biden. 6 days. They were on a video call with President Biden. State Department was very involved, and that they were not getting much of a response from the Israeli government, and that him and Netta and Tal were going to come to Washington, D.C. within the next week to try to advocate for their release in Washington for that reason. And we talked about the idea of they know we're filmmakers, and we talked on that call about the idea of documenting some of what they were going through with not exactly knowing what the purpose would be, but I think we all felt that we would put something together quickly and rapidly to try to raise awareness around the journey of trying to get them out. And as we started to film in Israel and in DC and eventually in Portland, what was unfolding in front of our camera was such a complex and really, really important story that just did not feel to us that it was in the world. And it felt like a story of a family. And the kind of questions that each of them were wrestling with, each of their identities, the ways they were processing grief, the ways that they brought their politics into the conversations, and the ways they were confronting those differences felt like something universal and very needed in the world. And so we started filming, not knowing at all where this would end. We had no idea. Every single day, this whole film was made, every day we're waking up having no idea where that day is gonna go. And I really give Yehuda, Chaya, Tal, the LIAT, the entire family so much credit, because they opened their lives to us and our camera and Yoni and our crew at the most vulnerable and darkest moment in their lives, so that all of you could sit in a movie theater and have this experience. And so I think we should give the family a huge round of applause for vulnerability.
Brandon has a very, I would say almost heartfelt but technical approach to how the film came about. Actually, my intention was that you need to understand that my understanding about the events that were unfolding were based on the discussion that the American hostage families had with President Biden on October 13th. And we were all convinced, the American hostage families, that this whole episode was going to be over in a matter of 2 or 3 weeks at the most. So when it became known that I was going to Washington together with Netta, I thought, hey, we can make a little movie, a home movie almost like, and to present it to LIAT and Aviv when they got home, and they say, this is what we did, haha, it's over, and here's some documentation. LIAT is a history teacher, actually, so it would be natural to create some kind of documentation about this historic event. Unfortunately, events didn't unfold that way, and it kept developing as Brandon explained. So it was a process that very quickly turned into something that we actually really did not know what the next day would hold. And from that, basically, the decision that allowed this film to be created was taken by LIAT in the hospital there. Because she could have said at that moment that she doesn't agree for this to be filmed. And at first she did not. But I think after consideration on her part, which I had nothing to do with her decision, but I think she understood the enormity of the situation, and she agreed to go ahead with the film.
And I'll just add that when I got a call from Lance and Brandon, whose work I had known and worked with briefly about a decade ago, that their cousins were coming to DC to film, or that to advocate, and that they were caught up in this episode, I mean, to be honest, my first response was, let's not film anything. I mean, I think it was pretty clear that these kinds of stories could be weaponized, can be used for political ends. And I think the more I talked with, I think we had like 4 phone calls in the series of 12 hours where I asked you and we talked about your family, not just LIAT and Aviv, but this whole constellation. And it became pretty clear that your mission here was to unpack the complexities of this family and not try to tell something bigger than that, but to keep the lens on what their lived experience would be. And to me, that seemed like a really valuable contribution.
Brandon and Yoni, if you could, I'd like to unpack that a little bit. Was there any particular moment while you were filming where you knew that, okay, this, not to say that, oh, we know this is going to be a film, but rather that, you know, the project had outgrown its original purpose as this sort of documentation? Were there any scenes or moments you had filmed where you realized that there needs to be something bigger with this?
There were, I can think of 2, maybe 3. The scene where Yehuda, Netta, and Tal are in the lobby of a hotel. They just got to DC. And Yehuda shares with his grandson that when we're meeting with these senators and congresspeople and press, we obviously need to talk about LIAT and Aviv. We need to get them home. That's, you know, our priority. But we also need to use this as a moment to speak about peace and reconciliation and what happens the day after and coexistence. That seems like a very common thing that's said now, 2 weeks after October 7th, for somebody whose daughter and son-in-law were in captivity, to say that was extraordinary. And when we filmed that moment, and then to hear Netta, who's days away from barely surviving the attack just by holding the door to his safe room, speak about how that landed for him and his anger, and Tal, love your daughter so much, and just to be like, I don't want politics to be in this at all, Abba. That moment, Yoni, Lance, and I had a conversation after filming that scene. We were like, I think this is a movie. I don't think this is just something. I think there's something really profound occurring here. And then as we continued to film, and just bearing witness to seeing the political, the media forces that sort of swooped in, and seeing you stand up against and vocalize your feeling around the use of your story and your family's story to perpetuate something you did not agree with, and the ways that those decisions rippled throughout the family. We felt like this is a narrative that is just not being told right now. And a lot of people are looking at the hostages and the hostage families to try to make sense of this horrific moment and what happened. And here's a very nuanced, different take on what a family is going through. And it felt like a really important perspective to introduce, perspectives. And this is the 3rd film Lance and I have made telling a story from divergent perspectives. This is the kind of filmmakers and kind of films and stories we're interested in, is stories that deal with people coming at an issue from different lived experiences and ways of processing it. I just had never turned that approach onto family members of mine. So this is by far the hardest experience making a film.
The end game to what Brandon just explained now is that that first of all, this is the development of this film within the family is an ongoing thing, and I'm finding out piecemeal, very slowly, what our grandchildren are thinking, and what LIAT is thinking, as well as the other American hostage families, which obviously I'm in contact with a number of them still. So like this, like 2 months ago, LIAT told me that Ofri, and mind you, this is after more than a year and a half, said that I was a prophet with what I had said at the very beginning. In the film, there's a character, Einat Halevi Levine, who insisted that this was not about politics at all. So I had spoken with her at the beginning of the summer, and she said that I was right, and that it was always political, the issue about the hostages. Ruby Chen, who was a friend of mine now at this point, did not agree at the beginning that the political issues should be raised at all. Towards the end, particularly over the past half year until his son's body was returned, had become very, very critical of Netanyahu and the government. And it turns out that basically the entire group came around to the understanding that the hostage issue was political from day one, basically, and that the hostage family forum, in their attempt to remain apolitical, had actually done a disservice in terms of freeing the hostages.
Yoni, maybe as a producer you can speak to this, especially, you know, a lot of times in documentary, there's a lot of prep, many years of development. You start shooting, you shoot for Lord knows how long, then you're in the edit room, and then let's say 5 to 6 years later, there's a movie that you can start giving people. This is not how that movie went, obviously, based on these initial conversations. I know that you folks were shooting and editing simultaneously, which is very rare for a documentary, especially like this. Can you talk to me a little bit about what it takes for a film team to manage this kind of fast-paced environment and, you know, to constantly be really on your toes? You know, you could be editing one thing and then the next day you could have a better version of what you just edited, and then you'd have to start from the beginning, you know? So talk to me a little bit about that experience.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of credit should go to Lance Kramer, who's not here today, my colleague and Brandon's brother, who really, I think, set the standard that we were going to work as fast as possible to get this film out, principally because we thought what your family was going through was something that the world needed to see, but that we weren't going to cut any corners to do that. And to do that, that meant we couldn't write proposals or apply to grants. We had to ask friends and family to help us, some of whom are here today, and let us jump into this, film as it was happening, mobilize teams across the country, including in Israel, to be there when we couldn't be there, bring on an incredible editor, Jeff Gilbert, to work with us to unpack what we were seeing. And you know, he and Brandon were getting footage that we had shot together while LIAT was being released, at the same time while new footage was being captured with her new life coming out. So it was an incredibly iterative process.
I just want to, Yoni is a producer, but Yoni is also the director of photography of this film and did an incredible job filming under extraordinarily difficult circumstances. And, you know, most cinematographers that I've worked with, you know, they come in, you have like a day rate, you come in for 8 hours, 10 hours. We were sleeping on the floor outside Yehuda's hotel room so we could film 2 a.m. phone calls from the IDF. We were living in Yehuda and Chaya's kibbutz. Yoni really, you know, poured himself into this film, and, you know, our collaboration was one where I was feeling reluctant so many times to film because Yehuda and Chaya are family members that I love, that my introduction to Israel was staying on their kibbutz 20 plus years ago. And Yoni, to his great credit, would say to me, you know, no, this is okay, we can film. And moments that I thought were too painful, too difficult, we were asking too much of them, he felt like we have a responsibility to document that, and so our collaboration is why this film is possible. So I just want to acknowledge.
Thanks. And now I have new family through Yehuda and Chaya who have given my children so many Kinder eggs. Thank you for those.
Yehuda,
They always forget to add to this. I think one of the most important understandings from my point of view. So I need to explain that my profession is I'm a landscape architect, which is basically an art form where the architect is usually called upon to present his concepts to the client. So basically, you're exposing your inner self to the outside world, and that is the essence of art, I think, in its purest form. So I came, at a certain point, I understood that this film was way beyond a simple documentary project. This was actually a work of art on the first order of magnitude, and what was required on my part, and what I communicated to other members of the family, was that as artists, we need to expose our souls to the camera in this respect. And I think that we pulled that off very well.
you just answered my next question, so thank you for that. I want to talk about the way in which this film handles portraying the perspectives, the many different perspectives. Again, I mentioned this in the beginning. In my line of work, we watch a lot of media about very traumatic situations, about people giving testimony and people, having to unearth very deep trauma. And it is very difficult, and this is not to put anyone down in any way, but it is very difficult to make a film about these subjects and to not almost immediately evoke sympathy in ways that are very tried and true in filmmaking. The use of music, the way shots are constructed, and not for no reason. Some films, you want the audience to be in a certain place to handle those stories. But what I admire so much about this film is that you have so many different characters in this film, and they express this very wide range of perspectives, and yet not one time did I really feel like I was being manipulated or alienated or anything like that. I just felt like you were observing them, and the camera was sort of kind of like almost, it was very intimate, but it was almost like a fly on the wall. You're just sort of hearing them express themselves. And as a filmmaker, I'm almost trying to find the secret sauce almost. I'm trying to get inside your head a little bit. What is it? What is the process? What are the techniques that you use as a filmmaker to capture those perspectives in a way that feels effective, but not in a way that it feels like you're tugging at strings per se?
Yeah, I'll say a few things. So the first decision was, we started filming 2 weeks after October 7th. And so the first decision was this movie needs to begin 2 weeks after October 7th. This movie needs to start in our entrance to the family's experience and stay grounded to that, which was a decision. And I think, some people come in expecting the film to, include that day. That's not where our entry point was to this story. And that's not, the story is about this family's experience. So that was one of the first decisions that was made. We spent a lot, it's more about the time that we spent with each one of the family members without a camera than it is about when you actually have a camera. So for every minute of footage, there's hours that we're spending just getting to, be with them, be present with them, express our care, help them. I mean, Yehuda's running around DC. We live there. We were helping make sure he could get to different places, just being supportive to them. And also getting to learn and understand what each of them are going through and make clear to every single person in the family that we are not trying to, I want to empathize and understand with how each one of you are processing this in your own way. And I genuinely felt that way, whether I agreed with your politics or not. That's not the film's job is not to judge or look down on anybody. That was one of the earliest ethics that I was trained by my mentors with when it comes to storytelling. And that's a really difficult thing to do with a film like this, because honestly, when we started filming with Yehuda, people in the family, the other family members, then there's an assumption, and this happens anytime you make a film, that then if we're filming with him, then clearly if we're filming also with Netta, who does not feel the same way you do, then we're going to make him into an antagonist. We're looking down on him. Joel, Yehuda's brother, when we had our first conversations about filming with him in Portland, was very reluctant to participate in the film because he had a very different set of views than you had, and expressed concern that if he's in the film, he's clearly going to be portrayed in this way that's going to be, in a negative light. And so it's a lot of conversations making it clear that that's not what we're doing. We actually want to understand and have audiences connect with each one of you. There's also the ethic of every film we make, including this one, we're going to show the family the finished film before it's released to the world, before it's locked. And that's what we did. So we had one-on-one screenings with Yehuda and Chaya, with Tal, with Liat, with the grandkids, and Joel and Miriam, his wife, and gave them the opportunity and said, this is what we think is authentic and true to your experience, but tell us what you think. And there was not a single thing that we had to change as a result of those screenings. So it's those kind of steps that, and then when it comes to sound and music and, when you're in the edit, there's a million tools that you can use to elicit emotion. And the direction that I gave the editor, that I gave the composer, the sound designer, was restraint. It was really pull everything back. This is emotional on its own. This is complex on its own. We do not need to use the tools to push that forward. And I think that creates an experience where there's just a more trust for the audiences to feel. Some people read scenes in this film completely differently. Audience members, I can't tell you how many people have come up to me after a screening and said, I loved this character. The film could have done without this character. And that's a constant refrain, and that's, you all are sitting in a movie. I'm sure there's a million different political perspectives in this audience, and you're all watching the same film. You're not watching one version of a narrative on your phone. You're watching one experience of one family, and that's the kind of dialogue and healing work that I think art and film in particular can play.
Talk to me about when Liat entered the picture. I especially want to hear about that scene towards the end of the film where she's with Radio Atlantic and she's giving her testimony. When you captured that scene, and really when you started capturing her perspective, what were your, and I mean, Yoni, you could answer this question too, like what were your reactions when you started capturing this footage? And, were there any reservations about including anything that she spoke about? Was there a feeling that, maybe, the family is, going to take center stage and Liat isn't necessarily going to become as much of a character as she does in the third act? What was the process like in sort of incorporating her into the third act of the film?
Sure. I want to mention one other person who's actually here with us today. When you're making a film like this, where there's no pre-production, there's no time to figure out what movie we're making, it's all unfolding in front of us. We were filming these moments, and it maybe doesn't sound, this doesn't sound obvious, but we don't know always what is unfolding in front of our camera. What do these scenes actually mean? And so there's an amazing filmmaker based here in Philadelphia. He's here with us. His name's Renan Alexandrovich. Hopefully he can wave his hand or something if he's here. And I want everyone to give Renan a round of applause. And Renan has been making films about this conflict for most of his life, and he was the person Yoni and I were sending raw footage to and saying, Renan, help us understand what story we're telling here. Help us understand what we're seeing, which is such an important role. Okay, LIAT coming out. I'll just try to say it as quickly as possible. It's such a complex thing. LIAT came out of captivity to first learn that her children survived the attack. She did not know that her children were alive. Then, sees them for the first time. 12 hours later, learns that her husband was killed on October 7th inside the hospital. Soon thereafter, finds out there's been a documentary being made about her family over the last 54 days and is planning the funeral, which is going to be 2 days later. And so the conversation I had with her was, the first conversation was, we will film the funeral only if you want it filmed, and then we can give it to you and you can decide if you want this in the film. And the same goes for that scene where Yehuda, LIAT, and Tal and Chaya are sitting all together. We started filming that scene, and then she turned to us and said, this is too difficult. It's too emotional for me. And Yoni immediately left. The camera crew left. They started to have this amazing, really healing conversation. Then she came over. She was like, I actually want this documented. And so a big part of the ethical process in making a film like this is giving all of them, but in particular LIAT, who had her agency stripped of her, a lot of agency to determine if and when we would film. And thankfully, she really came around to understanding the importance of documenting it. The Atlantic scene, I'll just end with that. It's a perfect example of one of the things LIAT said to me when she came out was, I don't want to be put in a box. I don't want this film or any media to be representing me as something I'm not. And I said to her, that's great. That's exactly what I want. And so let this documentary be a space where the complexities and contradictions of what you lived through and how you're processing it can be shared. And so that scene was her sharing the horror that she lived through, the tragedy of her husband being killed, and sharing that she was held by people that treated her with humanity, with respect, and with care. And that is a contradiction. That is something that's very hard to hold these two things together, but it's her truth, and it's something, if she can sit with it and speak about it, then I think we all need to sit with it and speak about it.
My last question, I want to open it up to the audience for questions, but I have one more question. I think you're watching something very prescient and timely when you can watch it at one time and feel one way, and then you watch it a second time, not shortly after, and it's almost like a completely different experience. To give some context, I watched this film for the first time earlier this year, and I've watched it multiple times since, and as more news has developed, as hostages have been released, or early ceasefire deals were made, all of these things, the film is different. The film changes. I see new things. I notice new things. And I'd love to ask really all three of you, how has your relationship to the film and to your process making the film evolved as this conflict evolves and as we continue to have our eyes and ears peeled to the ongoing developments? We can start with Yehuda.
To be very frank, first of all, I've seen this film more than 20 times, actually. And I think that just as a self-preservation mechanism, I separate myself, sitting here or sitting in the audience from my person that appears in the film. I think that's entirely understandable. And this is how I deal with it. Now, like the first 10 times that I've seen the film, each time I picked up on certain nuances, that I hadn't hadn't picked up before. For example, the picture of the three of us or four of us in the posters holding LIAT, I didn't realize that was actually taken from the movie until after the seventh time that I saw the movie. So, okay, that's where that came from. It's again the complexities of the feelings, the trauma, having to deal with this. So for me, there really is a disconnect from the film, for better or for worse. And it is what it is. I'm very pleased seeing the reviews that the film is getting from around the world. I think the impact of the central message that the film brings has been received very well around the world. It's causing conversations that otherwise wouldn't happen, and I'm very happy with that. And in that respect, one of the purposes behind creating this film have been realized. I want to point out that for me personally, the value of this film will become apparent to my family 10 years down the road when my grandchildren have their own children, and they'll be able to see this film about their grandfather and their great-grandfather and great-grandmother. And for me, that's the real value of the film. Not necessarily some political goals or some political agenda. It's really about family in the end.
Yeah, I'll just say that I think in bringing this film out to the world over the last year, I think I've started to understand the role of this film in, I think, creating empathy and in trying to combat dehumanization, which I think is something that we're seeing a lot of right now. And I think traveling with the film, we've gotten to meet other filmmakers who are small film teams like us that don't have distribution from big streaming conglomerates that are doing that work specifically to add depth, add dehumanization to stories that are coming from Palestine and Gaza. And so I'll invite you all to watch films like Coexistence My Ass, The Voice of Hind Rajab, Put Your Soul on Your Hand and Walk. Those are all films that are coming out this fall and this winter. They'll be in theaters, they'll be online. Support those films, because that's the work of trying to excavate these stories from our social media feeds.
I'll just say two quick things. One is that having conversations around this issue is, in my opinion, a radical act in today's world. And so what we've been seeing is, and I hope you all do the same, is leave the theater, talk to people, call your cousin or your uncle. Thanksgiving is coming up. Sit around the Thanksgiving table, open up some of these conversations. I think that's really, really important. And then, LIAT is a member of this amazing organization called the Parent Circle. It's a group of 800 bereaved family members, Palestinian and Israeli, who have all lost loved ones from the conflict, paid the ultimate price, who have decided to be in community and work together toward peace, toward reconciliation. And I think that group and LIAT are modeling and showing that empathy does not need to be a choice, that you can have empathy for people suffering no matter who they are. And that's a beautiful thing.
Yes. Applause. Real quick, I'm just checking in with Dan over there in the back. Do we have time for questions? I think we have time for one or two questions. If we could, great. Okay, if we could raise the house lights a little bit. We do have microphones coming around. Does anyone have?
We'll also
any
be
questions?
outside too if you just want to talk to us one-on-one. We're not going to run away.
But don't be shy. If anyone has any questions. No one has one question. I find that very hard to believe. Yes, this woman right here in the middle.
What I noticed was that I thought was interesting, and I'm sure purposeful in the editing, that I was afraid put things in a little bit of a box, and that was the Bernie Sanders sticker. Does anybody else? No, I'm just saying, because that was a little bit to me.
Well, he'll have an answer about this, but yeah, it's his Prius, but I'll just say, I mean, from my perspective as the filmmaker, you know, it's not me putting a box, it's me showing you audiences who Yehuda is, and that's Yehuda. You know, so, you know, there's and I think it's a really important point, though, that I just want to name, because there's a version of filmmaking where I'm trying to make a political message and use the protagonist to make that message. And then there's the way of filmmaking where you're observing and trying to understand what this family is going through. Bernie Sanders is a significant part of this.
Can anybody imagine a Prius without a Bernie sticker? I mean, come on. Listen, please pay attention. Please pay attention. During the course of my visits to Washington, of which there are 5, I think, the list of politicians with whom I spoke is rather long and intense. I have a stack of business cards like this from senators and congressmen. We need to understand that what we hear in the media, what we see in the headlines, are manufactured stories that are designed to grab our attention. And the connection between those stories and any kind of truth is entirely coincidental. So I spoke with Bernie Sanders personally, as I spoke with President Biden on 2 occasions. So I know where Bernie's coming from, and I need to say that the first resolution that came up in the Senate to halt military aid to Israel, Bernie Sanders voted against that resolution. And he said, very simply, that if you're attacked, you have the right to defend yourself. The issue began when Sanders, who I think is sharper than your regular senator or congressman by a long shot, understood that Netanyahu was deviating from President Biden's path to management of the war, and that Netanyahu had a different agenda than the agenda of the United States of America. So Bernie Sanders, by the way, has consistently labeled this war Netanyahu's war and not Israel's war against Hamas. So we need to be precise when we're discussing things in the public sphere. And I'll tell you, I take extreme exception against people who leverage the tragedy of October 7th to attain or realize their own political agenda. I think that's just downright disgusting, to be very honest. And there are no lack of senators or congressmen who do exactly that. So Bernie Sanders is fine. I can add to that during the 2024 State of the Union, I also met with AOC. In one of my other meetings with congressmen, I met Rashid Tlaib. And again, what is said in the media about her does not reflect what her positions are in reality. So we need to all calm down. Everybody needs to calm down and to break the social media algorithm that's driving the divisions in our society and in our Jewish community as well. And just take a breath before we get off.
I'm sure we have many more questions, but we do have a reception outside, and the filmmakers will be available for that. But I did want to give Yoni one moment.
I'll just put on my producer hat and ask you guys, we are a very grassroots film, no streamer money behind us, but we are going to be opening nationally in January at the Film Forum in New York City and Laemmle Theaters in Los Angeles and potentially in Philadelphia. But you guys could actually help us come back to Philadelphia. So here's what you do. I know we've been talking a lot of bad stuff about social media, but now it's going to come help us. So go on to Instagram, holding LIAT, and then once you like us on that media, go to the Philadelphia Film Society and ask them to bring us here.
Let your local theater know that Philly and Pennsylvania want Holding LIAT.
You can Instagram them too.
Yes, 100%. Thank you, Yoni Brook, Brandon Kramer, and Yehuda Beinin. Thank you all so much.